Are you disappointed with your coffee making efforts at home? Where does the journey to coffee enlightenment begin? Hi, my name's Stephen and welcome to Barista Banter. You know, Jesus almost certainly never drank coffee, and although we have the Muslim world to thank for the explosion of the cafe scene across the world, Muhammad probably didn't either. Now, the original coffee house is quite different to the ones we know of today, where we often sit with our smartphones tweeting each other. The coffee houses were places which a stranger could go and get a cheap education, where people could meet and have robust discussions over politics and religious thought. And these coffee houses exploded in the Middle East through the 16th and 17th centuries and on into Europe. But what I wanted to do is kind of recapture today some of the essence of what those original coffee houses were about. I want us to improve our coffee and rethink life. A wise sage from the Old Testament said, "There's nothing better than to eat, drink, and to enjoy your labours." So how can we begin enjoying our coffee labours? Where do we start? Well, where did I start? My coffee journey almost started and stopped in the same place, because the first time I drank coffee, it was something very familiar that we all recognise and know from our supermarkets and probably is in our cupboard. I first tasted it at a university church. All the university students were drinking it, and I was truly horrified by the taste of what we all know as instant coffee. Now, instant coffee, for me, I found it bitter and harsh, and needing copious amounts of sugar. In fact, I think instant coffee is probably the reason why so many people like putting sugar in any coffee they buy, because their brain is just tuned to the fact that you need sugar to drink this substance. For me, it was the instant rejection of instant coffee. Now, instant coffee was developed by a guy, I think around 1906, an Englishman in Guatemala. Loved his coffee, but noticed the compound forming around the spout of his jug as it made his coffee. And he thought, wow, what if I could make more of that? And he was a chemist, so he worked out a way of dehydrating his coffee and making the coffee granules that could be rehydrated later. And that's pretty much how instant coffee is made today. It really took off, though, during the World Wars. Instant coffee became a real hit in the trenches of the battlefields, keeping soldiers awake. So I guess if you want to reminisce about the muddy trenches of the Somme with your tin of bully beef for lunch, don't let me stop you. But for me, my next stage was really finding that coffee came from roasted beans and could be bought ground, ready to go. Now, the problem with this one was I never knew how much to put in, too much, too little, but also three things make coffee degrade very fast, and they are light, moisture, and air. And of course, once a bean's broken down into a ground form, you can imagine the light, moisture, and air just attacking that coffee and degrading it very, very fast. Now, of course, you can buy it in these vacuum-sealed bricks, though, can't you? And to some degree, they do lock in the freshness that was once there when it was roasted. But to get it in these vacuum seals, the coffee really has to be pre-staled, because fresh roasted coffee gives off CO2. And if you packed it in the vacuum bags without some form of pre-staling, they burst the bags. So for me, a fairly dissatisfying experience I found with ground coffee. And I moved quickly on to the beans. A friend of mine I flattered with brought home beans. We had a slasher grinder, and voila, we're on to something much, much more improved. However, if you go to your local supermarket and you look for a bag of beans, you'll often find a beautifully packaged and branded pack, not dissimilar to this one, with great information about what grind to use depending on the process, whether it's espresso or filter, and also a date on the pack. A best before or use by or expiration date will be on the pack. Now, this is a great date to have if you're buying milk or cheese or yogurt. It's pretty useless when it comes to coffee. Coffee after the expiration date probably won't hurt you, but the real date we need to have is the roast date. Coffee loses its mojo big time after 3 weeks from when it was roasted. Now, of course, not many supermarkets are going to be bold enough to put a roast date on the pack, because people like you and I are going to leave it on the shelf. because most of the coffee in a supermarket, as you know, is going to be sitting in distribution bays for months. So what we need to do is get ourselves to a local roaster who can supply us with coffee that is within 3 weeks of when it was roasted. Have a look at this pack. This pack has a date on it, but it's a lovely, music to my ears, roast date. And that lets me choose the beans and use them when this thing's on fire. So that's what you need to look for. Now I've got a couple of samples here. I've got 2 samples of beans. One's about 5 weeks old, one is a week old. This one's going to taste a heck of a lot better than this one. But as you can see, very hard to tell a difference between either of them. So we really need that information about roast dates to make a wise choice and to get on the path to coffee enlightenment. Let's make some coffee and we'll see the difference. I'm going to make 2 coffees using the plunger. We need 10 grams each. I've measured out 10 grams of the pre-ground coffee from the supermarket. We've got the water boiled, but it's just come off the boil. We want it about 95 degrees. So we can go the 10 grams into one plunger. That one's ready to go. And over here, second plunger, we're going to grind our beans fresh, okay? 10 grams of beans from our local roaster, which are well within their 3 weeks. Only a week old. That's about it. And straight away, wow, you can smell so much happening here, so much freshness, so much vibrance, so much fruitiness. It's beautiful compared to this pack that's been sitting around for a few months. Absolutely dead, rank, rancid smell. Now, admittedly, it's been in the cupboard for a while, but how many of us have one of these in a cupboard sitting around waiting for someone to come over? I mean, it's just awful. So let's get that in the plunger. Hot water, not boiled, but just below the boil over the top of each. About a cup for each one. We're pouring from a bit of a height. We want to kind of disturb those grounds. We want coffee for one in each of them. We do need to let this brew a little, so we'll just let it sit for a few seconds. We really want to get on with this for the sake of the tape, but essentially you should let it sit for about 4 minutes to get a real brew out of it. But we're going to plunge pretty soon, and hopefully we'll be able to see just with the naked eye the difference between freshly roasted coffee and something that's been sitting around for a while pre-ground. So we'll plunge the first one, and this really just stops those grounds coming into our drink. We just get the liquid. And the other one. As you can see on the top, I don't know if you can see that, but already you can see a lovely amount of crema on the top of this freshly roasted and ground coffee versus the lack thereof on the other one. Now, it's a good idea to pre-warm your cups. Let's wiggle a bit of liquid out. First the pre-ground. And as you can see, not a lot happening there. And now for the freshly ground, roasted within the last week. Just looking at that, I look like I've made it a little weak than I would normally do it. But you can see on the surface there a whole lot more happening, a lot more crema on the surface compared to the pre-ground supermarket coffee. And if we were to smell that, we're going to get some lovely wet aromas coming off this one, being interfered with by the smell coming off with that one, and clearly the taste of this is going to be quite amazing. Yeah, amazing, delicious. Well, this is Barista Banter. Improve your coffee, rethink life.